January 16, 1991, Montgomery, Alabama. The temperature had dropped into the low 40s, and a thin mist clung to the pines along Old Selma Road. At 7:42 a.m., a county maintenance worker pulled his truck onto the shoulder near a drainage culvert, expecting nothing more than a routine debris check. What he found instead would ignite a 30-year mystery and tear open questions this town still struggles to answer. Inside that ditch lay the partially concealed body of 30-year-old Valerie McCorvey, a beloved mother of two, a church soprano, and a face everyone in Montgomery's West End knew. Her purse was missing. Her car, found idling 3 blocks away, still had the keys in the ignition. There were no witnesses, no struggle marks, no footprints other than hers. Detectives would later call it one of the most haunting scenes of their careers. To the public, it was a tragedy. To those who knew Valerie, it was impossible to believe. A kind, soft-spoken woman with no enemies, dead without reason. But within days, rumors spread like wildfire. Some said it was a random attack. Others whispered about revenge, jealousy, and a secret she never told anyone. For years, the case went nowhere, until new forensic technology unearthed evidence that had been overlooked for decades. And when the truth finally came out, it wasn't a stranger. It was someone close, someone who had stood among the mourners, offering condolences, while carrying the secret of what really happened that night. This is the story of Valerie McCorvey, a mother, a friend, and a name Montgomery refused to forget. It's a story about the limits of justice, the power of faith, and how modern science finally gave a voice to someone silenced far too soon. Before we continue this journey into one of Alabama's most unsettling cold cases, take a second to hit subscribe and like this video. Your support helps bring stories like Valerie's back into the light and tells the algorithm that these voices still matter. Because when the truth finally emerged, it did more than solve a murder. It forced a community to confront how easily evil can hide in plain sight. Before we go deeper into the mystery of Valerie McCorvey, I want to thank you for being here. Every week, we revisit cases that time tried to bury, stories that deserve answers, families that deserve peace, and victims who deserve to be remembered for more than their final moments. Our mission on this channel is simple: to shine a light into the corners history forgot, to pair careful research with empathy, and to remind the world that justice delayed does not have to mean justice denied. These videos take months of investigation, interviews, and verification to ensure the story you hear is grounded in fact, not rumor. We don't sensationalize tragedy. We document it with respect, context, and humanity. If you believe every life deserves its story told, if you want to see forgotten cases finally find their truth, then take a moment now to subscribe, like, and share. It helps the algorithm surface cases mainstream media has long moved past, and it helps families know that people still care. Now, let's return to that January morning in Montgomery and the woman whose disappearance would test the limits of faith, community, and forensic science. Tonight, we're going to trace the long, twisting path of the Valerie McCorvey case. From the night she vanished, through decades of silence, to the moment science and persistence finally caught up with the truth. We'll begin with who Valerie was, not as a headline, but as a daughter, mother, and neighbor whose kindness defined her community. Then, we'll step inside the first chaotic days of the investigation, the witness statements, the overlooked details, and the choices that would let her killer walk free for nearly 30 years. You'll see how the case went cold, how time eroded leads, and how grief reshaped the lives of everyone who loved her. And then we'll move into the modern breakthroughs, the reopening of evidence boxes, the unexpected DNA match, and the arrest that stunned even the detectives who thought they'd seen everything. Finally, we'll follow the story into the courtroom, a place where decades of pain met undeniable proof, and explore what justice meant for a family that had already lost so much. By the end of tonight's video, you'll understand why this case has become a benchmark for cold case investigation in the Deep South, and how, even after years of silence, truth can still rise from the red Alabama soil. Montgomery, Alabama, 1991. The city sat in that uneasy space between past and present, where history lingered on every corner and progress moved with cautious steps. Downtown brick buildings still carried faded paint from segregation-era businesses, while new storefronts tried to signal a modern South. The civil rights museums had begun drawing tourists, but for most locals life was quiet, familiar, and bound by church schedules, Friday night football, and family gatherings. The West End neighborhood, where Valerie McCorvey lived, was a close-knit cluster of modest homes shaded by pecan trees. Here, neighbors still borrowed sugar across back fences and kept an eye on each other's children. Streetlights came on early in winter, and everyone knew the rhythm of their block, the mailman's whistle at 3 p.m., the sound of gospel rehearsals drifting from the church basement after supper. Valerie fit perfectly into that rhythm. 30 years old, she worked part-time at a nursing home on Mobile Highway and sang soprano in the Greater Hope Baptist Choir. Friends described her as steady and soft-spoken, the kind of woman who wrote thank-you notes by hand and never missed a Sunday service. She was raising 2 young children with the help of her mother, Louise McCorvey, after separating from her husband several years earlier. Money was tight, but their little house on Caffey Street always smelled of cornbread and fabric softener. Faith held that household together. The early 1990s brought change to Montgomery's working class. Factories were downsizing, and crime statistics had begun creeping upward in certain districts. The city's murder rate in 1990 had been one of the highest in the state, but most cases were linked to drugs or domestic disputes. A woman like Valerie McCorvey, a church-going mother with no enemies, seemed untouchable by that darkness. That belief would soon be shattered. In January 1991, the nights had turned raw and damp. Police scanners crackled with reports of break-ins near abandoned lots, but the West End mostly slept peacefully. Valerie was focused on small things: saving for a used car that didn't stall at traffic lights, making sure her kids had perfect attendance at school, rehearsing a solo for the church's Black History Month program. Her diary entries from that month, later entered into evidence, were filled with ordinary plans. New shoes for Easter, an overdue light bill, and a promise to start fresh this year. Yet, beneath that ordinariness, people around her noticed subtle tension. A friend from choir remembered Valerie mentioning a disagreement with someone she didn't trust anymore. She didn't name them, and no one pressed further. It was Montgomery, after all, where gossip traveled fast and discretion was a virtue. The police department at the time was under-resourced. Budget cuts had left detectives juggling multiple open cases, and digital record-keeping was still years away. Most reports were typed on carbon paper and stored in grey filing cabinets that no one imagined would someday hold the key to a decades-long mystery. Evidence rooms smelled of dust and chain oil. Protocols were inconsistent, especially for crimes involving women of color. Those systemic cracks would matter later. Valerie's life represented so many in her community, ordinary people balancing faith, work, and quiet resilience. Her children, just 8 and 6, spent afternoons at their grandmother's house, waiting for the sound of her keys in the door. She was the kind of mother who ironed their school clothes at night and left notes in their lunch boxes. To friends, she was reliable. To her family, irreplaceable. No one could have predicted that within 24 hours, her name would be on every radio station in Montgomery. That the same neighbors who shared coffee with her on Saturday morning would, by Monday, be organizing candlelight vigils on her front porch. And that this neighborhood, once defined by community warmth, would spend the next 3 decades haunted by one unanswered question: who took Valerie McCorvey's life, and why? The truth was already set in motion. Somewhere, someone knew exactly what had happened that night, and for years, they managed to live among the very people searching for answers. By every account, Valerie McCorvey's life revolved around her family, her church, and a handful of close friends who formed her circle of trust. She had been raised on the same side of Montgomery, where she was now raising her own children, Alicia, 8, and Jamal, 6. Her mother, Louise, lived only 2 blocks away and handled school pickups when Valerie worked late. Neighbors recall the McCorveys as quiet folks who kept to themselves but always waved. Valerie's co-workers at the Magnolia nursing home described her as patient to a fault. She volunteered for the shifts no one wanted, weekend evenings, double-backs after holidays, because the extra pay helped cover her rent. She kept a small locker by the break room, its metal door covered with family Polaroids and a handwritten Bible verse taped crookedly across the center. "Let all that you do be done in love." That line, investigators would later note, matched the inscription on the sympathy ribbons at her funeral. Outside work, Valerie's joy was music. Every Thursday she practiced with the Greater Hope Baptist Choir. She rarely sang solos, preferring to blend her voice into the harmony. But the choir director, Sister Eunice Caldwell, had persuaded her to perform a solo for the upcoming Black History service. "His eye is on the sparrow." Valerie had been nervous, carrying sheet music in her purse, humming the tune while folding laundry. It was the kind of small dream that kept her going. Friday, January 11th, 1991, began like any other. Valerie dropped her children off with her mother at 6:45 a.m., promising to be home before bedtime. She wore navy scrubs under a tan winter coat, her hair wrapped neatly beneath a scarf. She worked a full shift at Magnolia, clocking out a few minutes before 3 p.m., then stopped at Winn-Dixie for groceries. Bread, peanut butter, laundry detergent. The receipt, later retrieved from her purse, would provide one of the few verified timestamps of her last day. That evening, according to her friend Darlene Pierce, Valerie stopped by briefly for coffee. They sat at Darlene's kitchen table, steam rising from mismatched mugs. Valerie seemed distracted, Darlene recalled, checking the clock, glancing toward the window. When asked what was wrong, she'd smiled thinly and said, "It's nothing I can't handle, just someone I need to straighten things out with." Darlene didn't press. In Montgomery, small disagreements were rarely cause for alarm. At 7:20 p.m., Valerie left Darlene's house. Streetlights had already come on, and a damp chill hung in the air. She mentioned she had to run by somewhere real quick before heading home. Exactly where she went next became the crux of the investigation. Around 8:05 p.m., residents along Old Selma Road reported hearing a brief argument near the edge of a vacant lot. 2 voices, one female, one male. The words weren't clear, but a dog started barking and a car door slammed. No one called police. Such noises weren't unusual on that stretch of road. By 8:30, the area was silent again. At 9:10 p.m., Louise McCorvey phoned her daughter's house. No answer. She assumed Valerie had fallen asleep, putting the kids to bed. The next morning, when the children arrived at Louise's porch, driven by a neighbor, alone, confused, saying their mother hadn't come home, panic replaced assumption. Louise contacted police at 9:47 a.m. to file a missing person report. Initial responders found Valerie's 1985 Toyota Camry 3 blocks from her home, parked crookedly near a vacant building, driver's door slightly ajar, keys still in the ignition. Her purse was missing, but her coat remained on the passenger seat. Officers noted a faint smear on the interior handle, later confirmed as blood, though degraded beyond early testing methods. To them, it looked like a simple disappearance, maybe voluntary. Within hours, that assumption would collapse. At 7:42 a.m. the following day, a county maintenance worker discovered a body in a drainage culvert off Old Selma Road. Identification took less than an hour. It was Valerie. The autopsy revealed cause of death as asphyxiation due to manual strangulation. There were signs of blunt trauma, consistent with a struggle, but no evidence of sexual assault. Toxicology came back clean. Defensive wounds marked both hands, implying she fought back. Beneath her fingernails, trace skin cells were collected and sealed in a small paper envelope, a detail that would matter far more decades later than anyone realized at the time. Detectives canvassed the area within hours. Interviews, door-to-door searches, reward flyers, standard procedure. Yet no solid lead emerged. Her ex-husband was questioned first. He had an alibi corroborated by co-workers. Friends and co-workers offered nothing beyond shock. Darlene told police about Valerie's cryptic remark, but couldn't identify whom it referred to. The case began wide and immediately narrowed into confusion. Within a week, rumors surfaced. An acquaintance from church who'd been overly friendly, a former co-worker she'd argued with over missing shifts, a neighbor who'd once asked her out. But every theory collided with the same obstacle: no physical evidence strong enough to connect anyone to the scene. Forensics in 1991 were limited. DNA comparison required far more material than those scrapings could provide. The evidence envelope was catalogued, sealed, and stored inside locker C-142 of the Montgomery PD property room. For the next 27 years, it would gather dust. For Louise McCorvey, time froze that winter. She told reporters she still set an extra plate at Sunday dinner for her daughter, just in case. The church held vigils. The nursing home staff collected donations for the children. But as months turned into years, the investigation lost momentum. The case file thickened with interviews and false leads. Valerie's children grew up under the shadow of an unanswered question. Behind every cold case lies an ordinary evening that turns extraordinary in the worst possible way. For Valerie, it was a Friday that should have ended with bedtime stories and folded laundry. Instead, it became the night Montgomery lost its faith in safety, and the beginning of a mystery that would outlive nearly everyone who first tried to solve it. When Valerie McCorvey failed to return home on the night of January 11th, 1991, no one panicked at first. Her mother assumed she'd stopped by a friend's house. Her co-workers figured she might have swapped shifts again. In Montgomery back then, missing adults, especially women, were often written off as probably taking a break before any real search began. By Saturday morning, when Valerie's children arrived at their grandmother's doorstep without her, that calm dissolved into fear. 8-year-old Alicia told her grandmother, "Mama said she'd be home before the cartoons." Jamal, 6, clutched his backpack, confused by the grown-up's sudden urgency. Within an hour, Louise McCorvey was calling everyone she knew, friends from church, Valerie's co-workers, even her estranged husband, who sounded genuinely shocked. At 9:47 a.m., she reported Valerie missing. The responding officer took notes on a thin pad, promised to file it, and left. Hours passed before detectives followed up. Montgomery police were already stretched thin that weekend, dealing with an armed robbery downtown and a domestic homicide. Valerie's file, marked missing adult, didn't stand out until her car was found that afternoon. The 1985 Toyota Camry sat awkwardly against the curb near an abandoned building on Holt Street. The driver's door was ajar, keys dangling from the ignition, and a single grocery bag, milk and bread, sat on the back seat, half frozen from the cold. Detectives noted smudged fingerprints on the handle but couldn't identify any full prints. The car wasn't stolen, nothing valuable was missing, and there were no signs of forced entry. For investigators, that scene raised more questions than answers. Did she park here voluntarily? Was she meeting someone? Why would a careful woman like Valerie leave her engine running? Neighbors around Holt Street recalled hearing nothing unusual, except for one man who mentioned seeing a dark-colored sedan idling nearby around 8:30. He didn't catch the license plate. That small detail, never verified, would linger as one of the earliest lost leads. As daylight faded, police began retracing her route from the nursing home to her home on Caffey Street. Officers interviewed store clerks along Mobile Highway, asking if anyone remembered seeing her. One cashier recalled a woman matching her description, buying groceries around 3 o'clock. No one reported seeing her afterward. Flyers with Valerie's photo, cropped from her church directory portrait, went up that evening across convenience stores and telephone poles. That night, local radio stations aired her name. Missing mother of 2, last seen wearing navy blue scrubs, brown winter coat, and white sneakers. The West End community responded immediately. Neighbors gathered at Greater Hope Baptist Church, organizing search groups. Men with flashlights combed nearby woods. Teenagers taped posters along bus stops. The Montgomery Advertiser printed a small notice in its Sunday edition. By Sunday morning, more than 50 volunteers were searching the empty lots along Old Selma Road. Among them was a county maintenance worker named Robert Gilman. Around 7:40 a.m., while clearing debris from a drainage culvert just off the highway, he noticed a scrap of tan fabric caught against the metal grate. When he looked closer, he saw what looked like a hand. He ran to his truck and radioed for help. Minutes later, sirens converged on the stretch of road that Montgomery residents still remember today. The discovery confirmed every mother's fear, every rumor's worst implication. It wasn't a missing person case anymore, it was homicide. The crime scene was taped off within the hour. Detectives from the Homicide Division arrived, led by Sergeant Harold Compton, a veteran investigator with 20 years on the force. They photographed everything: the culvert, the dirt embankment, the discarded shoe, the tire impressions leading back toward the road. Forensics technicians collected soil, hair, fibers, and that crucial envelope of fingernail scrapings. But technology then couldn't read the story hidden in those samples. The discovery site quickly drew crowds. Church members prayed aloud beyond the tape. Reporters hovered, cameras flashing. Louise McCorvey, escorted by officers, collapsed when she was told the news. She had to be carried away from the scene. That image, the grieving mother's cry echoing through the damp morning, would appear in the Montgomery Advertiser's front page the next day, searing the tragedy into public memory. In the days that followed, investigators mapped every possible timeline. They re-interviewed Darlene Pierce, the friend who'd last seen Valerie alive. They questioned co-workers, neighbors, ex-partners, anyone whose name appeared in her address book. Leads poured in, most contradictory, many meaningless. Someone claimed to have seen Valerie talking to a man near the bus station. Another insisted she'd been spotted at a nightclub across town. All of it collapsed under scrutiny. Detectives narrowed their focus to people within Valerie's circle. A few names surfaced repeatedly: a co-worker who'd been disciplined after an argument with her, a handyman who sometimes fixed her car, and a member of her church who had, according to other choir members, shown interest she didn't return. But without hard evidence. Everything was speculation. By late February, the department had exhausted its initial momentum. The media moved on. The flyers yellowed on lampposts. A local pastor led a memorial service attended by hundreds declaring, "We will not let this case die." Yet quietly, the investigation began to stall. In the official report, Sergeant Compton summarized those first 3 weeks in one line. All leads checked, no suspect developed. No one realized then that a small envelope of scrapings sealed that same day the one marked nail evidence McCorvey would one day reopen everything. The days after Valerie McCorvey's body was found, Montgomery police poured every available detective into the case. For a week, the homicide unit operated out of a temporary command post near Old Selma Road, their unmarked cars lining the shoulder. Every morning began the same way: steaming coffee in paper cups, stacks of tips, and the same question echoing through the cramped trailer: who would want Valerie dead? The short answer was no one. The long answer grew murkier each hour. Investigators began, as they always did, with proximity. Valerie's ex-husband, Curtis McCorvey, was questioned at length. The couple had separated in 1988 but remained civil for the sake of their children. Curtis worked the night shift at a tire plant. Time cards confirmed he was on site from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. on the night of her death. His supervisor backed that up, and so did the plant's sign-in logs. After 2 days of checking, detectives cleared him. Next came co-workers. The nursing home staff painted a picture of harmony, except for one aide, Gloria Parks, who told police about tension between Valerie and a maintenance worker named Leon Sutter. According to Gloria, Leon had offered to drive her home several times even after she declined. Valerie supposedly told Gloria, "He don't mean harm, but he don't take a hint either." Investigators interviewed Sutter. He admitted asking her out once but denied any contact beyond work. His alibi, playing cards with friends that night, checked out. Still, his name lingered in the margins of early reports. Media speculation fueled the idea of a random predator. Reporters pointed to a string of purse snatchings near Mobile Highway earlier that winter. Detectives compared patterns, but none involved violence. The theory generated more fear than evidence. Tips flooded the hotline: sightings of suspicious vans, unknown men, headlights parked on side roads. Each call required follow-up. Each follow-up bled manpower. A local psychic even claimed she felt the killer lived near water. Officers humored her. It went nowhere. Attention soon turned to Greater Hope Baptist Church, Valerie's spiritual home. Choir director Sister Eunice Caldwell described Valerie as devoted, but lately worried about somebody. She wouldn't say who. Another member, Deacon Harold King, recalled seeing Valerie speaking with a man in the church parking lot a week before her death. Short conversation, raised voices, then laughter. The man drove away in a maroon Buick. No one recorded the license plate. When police canvassed the congregation, one name surfaced repeatedly: Reggie Dawson. A 35-year-old volunteer electrician who had helped rewire the church sound system. Dawson was known for being friendly, sometimes too friendly. He admitted to spending time with Valerie occasionally, helping fix her porch light and babysitting once. Phone records, back when calls were logged manually, showed several between their houses that winter. Detectives questioned him twice. He denied any romantic relationship, claiming Valerie was like a sister. He also denied seeing her on the night she died. What gave them pause was his timeline. He said he was home watching television from 7 to 10 p.m., alone. No witnesses, no receipts. Still, nothing directly tied him to the crime scene, and he was released. Later notes in the file would mark his name with a small asterisk and the words, "Keep in view." Technically, there wasn't much of one. The forensic unit photographed tire impressions near the culvert, but heavy rain washed them out before molds could be taken. Fibers recovered from Valerie's coat included synthetic strands, consistent with car seat upholstery, but too common to trace. The fingernail scrapings were sealed properly, yet the state lab reported insufficient sample for typing. With no usable DNA, detectives fell back on interviews. They logged over 200 statements during January and February 1991. Each new lead seemed promising for 24 hours, then evaporated. A truck driver claimed he'd seen a woman running beside Old Selma Road that night. When re-interviewed, he wasn't sure what date it was. A store clerk insisted Valerie had argued with someone near the payphone outside Winn-Dixie, but security cameras were grainy, looping on 24-hour tapes already overwritten. What remained were theories, each one colliding with another, each demanding more time than the department could afford. By mid-March, the community's patience was thinning. Church leaders urged police to show progress. Newspapers questioned whether the department cared enough. Rumors of racial bias circulated quietly. Most homicide victims in Montgomery that year were black women, and none of those cases were yet solved. For detectives, the scrutiny added weight, but not clarity. Sergeant Compton held a press conference promising, "We're pursuing all credible leads," off camera. He confided to a reporter that they had nothing solid. The McCorvey family felt the shift. Officers stopped returning calls as quickly. Volunteers faded. Life resumed its uneasy normalcy. By summer 1992, the task force budget was gone. Valerie's file moved from the active board to the gray filing cabinet in the homicide archives. Drawer B, case 91-117, the evidence envelope, small paper, hand-labeled, was logged into property storage and forgotten. Detective Compton retired 2 years later. In interviews decades afterward, he admitted the case haunted him. "We were missing something obvious," he said. "But without science to back it, your gut don't count in court." For Montgomery's West End, the McCorvey case became a cautionary story whispered to daughters. Don't walk alone, don't trust rides. Every anniversary brought a brief mention in local papers, then silence again. Valerie's children grew up, left Alabama, tried to outrun the weight of headlines that had defined their childhoods. Behind the scenes, one persistent beat investigator, Detective Monique Ellis, kept a photocopy of Valerie's photo in her desk. She'd joined the force in 1998, long after the murder, but the story bothered her. Once every few years, she'd reopen the file, skim the notes, and wonder what modern testing might reveal if the evidence still existed. She had no idea that one small envelope, still sealed, still legible, was waiting, patient as dust, for the day technology would finally catch up. Every cold case begins with a quiet decision. The day investigators stop believing a breakthrough is still possible. For Valerie McCorvey's murder, that moment came less than a year after her death. By late 1991, Montgomery police were drowning in new files. Homicides were rising, budgets shrinking, and paper evidence filled rooms that looked more like basements than labs. Valerie's case, officially catalogued as 91-117, wasn't closed, just moved from the active board to storage. No one said the words "give up." They simply stopped bringing her name up in morning briefings. The first problem was technology. The state lab in 1991 could only run rudimentary blood typing. DNA sequencing existed in theory, not in practice for small towns. The scrapings from Valerie's fingernails, her last act of resistance, were labeled insufficient for analysis and shelved. Years later, forensic scientists would call that envelope a miracle of preservation. At the time, it was just another unsolved sample. The second problem was procedure. Chain of custody forms were often handwritten, sometimes incomplete. Evidence lockers weren't climate-controlled. After a few humid Alabama summers, the ink on tags faded. In one 1993 audit, nearly a dozen homicide files were found misfiled, including Valerie's. It took 3 weeks just to locate her property inventory. Small mistakes multiplied, eroding what little confidence detectives had left. Then came turnover. Sergeant Compton retired. His replacement inherited 43 open homicides and no budget for cold case overtime. The younger officers wanted fresh work, not ghosts. Each believed the killer had been someone local but unprovable. One memo from 1994 simply reads, "All viable suspects cleared. Further pursuit not productive." In bureaucratic language, that meant move on. Meanwhile, community attention drifted. New tragedies took over headlines: the I-65 shootings, a missing child case, a political scandal at City Hall. Each year, the McCorveys lit candles at church on the anniversary, but the media stopped showing up. The absence of coverage created a new kind of silence, one that felt like erasure. For Valerie's children, grown into teenagers by then, their mother became a story no one wanted to tell because it reminded people how little had changed. By 1996, the box containing her case file sat on the lowest shelf of the homicide archive. Inside, 24 interviews, 6 Polaroids from the scene, 4 lab reports, and 1 untested envelope. The dust was half an inch thick. When the department transitioned to digital records in the early 2000s, several old files were flagged for destruction due to space limitations. Valerie's barely survived because Detective Monique Ellis, a new recruit fascinated by old mysteries, intervened. She signed her initials next to the case number, preventing it from being purged. At the time, she didn't know why it mattered, only that it felt wrong to let it disappear. That small act of defiance kept the story alive long enough for technology to evolve. Still, years of neglect carried a cost. Witnesses moved away, memories blurred, key suspects died, physical exhibits degraded. When Ellis later requested the old photographs, half were missing. Even the crime scene negatives had warped. Reconstructing what happened on Old Selma Road would require more than recollection. It would require a miracle. Perhaps the cruelest factor of all was human nature. People move on to survive. Detectives with too many failures learn to harden themselves. Families bury hope to protect their sanity. The system doesn't collapse in one dramatic moment. It erodes grain by grain until truth becomes a rumor filed under unsolved. For 25 years, the McCorvey case existed only as a number on a spreadsheet and a fading memory at Greater Hope Baptist Church. But inside locker C-142, the tiny paper envelope marked "Nail Evidence, McCorvey," waited, untouched, sealed with the original red wax. In 2017, a memo from the newly formed Alabama Cold Case Unit requested old samples for re-evaluation under advanced DNA protocols. Detective Ellis, now a seasoned investigator herself, recognized the name on that list. She drove across town to the evidence facility and signed out the box. Personally, that was the first time in 26 years anyone had spoken Valerie McCorvey's name inside a police station. And with that single signature, the long-dormant case took its first breath again. For the McCorvey family, Time stopped in January 1991. Every calendar after that year felt incomplete. Birthdays passed quietly, holidays half-hearted, always ending with the same empty chair at the table. Louise McCorvey, once known for her loud laugh and spotless Sunday hats, aged visibly within months. She kept Valerie's bedroom exactly as it was, the floral quilt pulled tight, a half-empty perfume bottle on the dresser, the last grocery receipt tucked under a magnet on the refrigerator door. She refused to call it a shrine. "It's just her room," she told visitors. But everyone understood. It was her way of keeping her daughter close. Louise's nightly ritual became legend in the neighborhood. Each evening around 8:30, the time Valerie was last heard alive, she sat on the front porch with the porch light burning bright. Sometimes she prayed aloud. Other times she simply whispered, "I'm still waiting, baby." Rain or heat, she never missed a night. Neighbors brought her coffee, sometimes sat beside her in silence. They said she could tell when people approached with pity instead of respect. She'd straighten her back and change the subject. "Don't you cry for me," she'd say. "Cry for the one who can't." Years later, when the city installed new streetlights, the utility crew offered to replace the porch bulb for free. Louise refused. She said the old one had never burned out once in 26 years. Superstition or faith, it didn't matter. That light became Montgomery's quiet memorial. Alicia and Jamal grew up under the shadow of headlines they never asked for. At school, classmates whispered. Some teachers treated them like fragile glass. Alicia learned to smile on command. Jamal learned to fight. Both carried their mother's photograph in the back pocket of their school folders. By their teens, they avoided talking about her death. The case felt cursed. Anyone who asked never wanted the long answer. Yet privately, each lived in opposite directions of grief. Alicia clung to faith, attending church with her grandmother every week. Jamal fled from it, saying, "God watched and didn't stop it." Their arguments about faith versus anger became a pattern that lasted well into adulthood. When Alicia graduated high school in 2000, Louise pinned Valerie's small gold cross to her granddaughter's gown. "She's walking with you," she whispered. Jamal, then 19, watched from the back row, unable to clap. That day was the last time all three generations would appear in a photograph together before Louise's health began to fail. Greater Hope Baptist never forgot Valerie. Every January the choir sang "His Eye is on the Sparrow" in her honor, the solo she never got to perform. The congregation called it Valerie's song. It became a tradition so rooted that even new members who had never met her knew the words by heart. Local journalists occasionally revisited the story for anniversary pieces, but they often focused on unsolved mystery angles, not the human loss. For those who knew her, that hurt almost as much as the murder itself. Pastor Ray Thompson once told a reporter, "You all keep writing about the killer we don't know. We remember the woman we did." In small southern towns, collective memory acts like an inheritance, passed down, reshaped, sometimes softened. By the late 2000s, a generation of Montgomery residents had grown up hearing the name Valerie McCorvey without details. She became a cautionary tale, the lady they found by the road. The real woman, the mother, singer, caregiver, was fading into abstraction. Louise's faith kept her alive longer than doctors predicted. She developed heart trouble in her 70s, but refused long hospital stays. "If the Lord brings justice, I want to be home when it knocks," she said. Detective Monique Ellis visited her several times after joining the cold case unit. She never promised miracles, only progress. Louise appreciated the honesty. On her last recorded interview in 2016, she told Ellis, "If I don't live to see it, make sure my grandbabies know who did this. Don't let them wonder the rest of their lives." That tape would later be played in court. Years after Louise passed away quietly in her sleep, the porch light still glowing outside. Alicia moved to Birmingham, became a registered nurse, the same field her mother once worked in. Jamal enlisted in the army, later settling in Texas. Both married, both had children of their own, yet neither escaped the feeling that something unfinished trailed them. Each time an unknown number called, Alicia's pulse spiked. Each time a news story mentioned Montgomery cold cases, Jamal's hands clenched. Hope became a reflex they didn't trust. In 2017, when the Alabama Cold Case Unit announced a statewide re-examination of old DNA evidence, Alicia saw the headline online but scrolled past it. She'd learned not to expect anything. 3 days later, Detective Ellis left a voicemail. "This is Monique Ellis from Montgomery PD. I wanted to talk to you about your mother's case. I think we may have something new." Alicia replayed the message 5 times before calling back. Jamal flew in the next week. For the first time in decades, the siblings stood on their grandmother's porch together. The same bulb burned above them, casting its familiar amber glow across the steps. It was there, in that doorway of grief and memory, that Detective Ellis told them the news. "We found a DNA profile from the nail scrapings. It matches someone already in the system," Alicia cried without sound. Jamal looked at the ground and whispered, "Mama, you finally got him." For the community, the call reignited old emotions: fear, anger, disbelief, but also relief. After 26 years of silence, Montgomery's forgotten case had a heartbeat again. When Detective Monique Ellis unsealed the McCorvey evidence box in the spring of 2017, she didn't expect much. Most envelopes from that era contained little more than smudged prints and faded photographs. But the small paper packet marked "Nail Evidence McCorvey" was still intact, its red wax seal unbroken, the handwriting from 1991 still legible. Inside were 2 sterile slides and a scrap of gauze. Back then, investigators had scraped beneath Valerie's fingernails using wooden sticks, rudimentary but careful work. It had been stored in dry conditions purely by accident, an old locker at the edge of the property room where humidity never reached. To Ellis, it felt like the case had been waiting. That year, the Alabama Cold Case Unit partnered with a private genomics lab in Virginia, one of the few equipped for next-generation low-copy DNA testing. Ellis overnighted the sample under chain of custody escort. 2 months later, the lab called. "We've got a partial profile," the technician said. "Male, non-familial, good enough to run through CODIS." For 26 years, Valerie's voice had been silent. Now, through technology, she was speaking again. Within 48 hours, the database returned a hit. Reginald Reggie Dawson, age 61, residing in rural Autauga County. The same Reggie Dawson who'd once helped rewire the church sound system and who had been interviewed back in 1991, then dismissed for lack of evidence. His DNA had entered the system after a 2015 conviction for aggravated assault. The profile matched the nail scrapings at a confidence level of 1 in 1 billion. Ellis printed the result twice, 1 copy for the case file, 1 to pin above her desk. "After all these years," she said later, Valerie finally pointed at him herself. A DNA hit alone wouldn't guarantee a conviction. They needed context, motive, and corroboration. Ellis assembled a small task force, 2 detectives, 1 crime lab analyst, and a retired prosecutor volunteering part-time. They re-interviewed every surviving witness from the original file. Gloria Parks, Valerie's former co-worker, remembered Dawson visiting the nursing home once, claiming to fix the AC. He hadn't been employed there. Sister Eunice Caldwell from the church recalled him hanging around the choir room, asking if Valerie was coming to rehearsal. None of it had seemed predatory then, but hindsight drew darker outlines. Digging through archives, Ellis found a 1990 incident report filed by another woman who had accused Dawson of harassment. Charges were dropped when he relocated out of county. The pattern fit too neatly to ignore. Meanwhile, the Virginia lab re-examined secondary evidence: the coat fibers, car upholstery swabs, and that faint smear on Valerie's driver's side door handle. Modern luminol mapping revealed trace blood matching her profile and a second partial DNA consistent with Dawson's. Even the soil from the culvert, stored in vials labeled environmental, sample contained microscopic textile threads identical to fibers from the passenger seat of Dawson's old Buick Regal, still registered in his name until 1994. The science built a chain that the original investigators could never have imagined. Contact, fingernail scrapings with Dawson's. DNA transport, fibers matching. His car upholstery on Valerie's coat. Deposition. E. Soil particles from his property, consistent with red clay at the culvert site. Piece by piece, the invisible became visible. On August 14, 2018, Ellis and 2 officers drove to Dawson's property, an aging trailer on 5 acres, surrounded by rusted cars and pine scrub. He answered the door barefoot, grey-haired, still broad-shouldered. "Reggie Dawson?" "Yeah, who's asking?" When Ellis identified herself and explained the purpose of the visit, his expression didn't change. He invited them in, offered coffee, and insisted he barely remembered that woman. They let him talk. Within an hour, inconsistencies surfaced. He misstated the year he left Greater Hope Baptist, claimed he'd never owned a maroon Buick, then corrected himself mid-sentence. When told his DNA matched evidence from Valerie's body, he blinked twice and said flatly, "That's impossible." The silence that followed was recorded, and prosecutors later described it as the moment the room turned. A warrant was executed 2 days later. In a shed behind his trailer, investigators found boxes of old tools, electrical wire, and a choir program from 1990 bearing Valerie's name in faded ink. It wasn't proof of murder, but it was proximity, and juries remember proximity. On August 17, 2018, the Montgomery Sheriff's Office announced the arrest of Reginald Dawson on 2 counts, murder and kidnapping. News crews filled the courthouse steps. For residents who'd grown up hearing the name McCorvey whispered over porches, the announcement felt unreal. After 27 years, the photo on the front page finally showed someone in handcuffs. Alicia and Jamal watched the press conference from their grandmother's living room. When the sheriff confirmed the DNA link, Alicia closed her eyes. Jamal muttered, "That porch light did it." In the weeks that followed, Ellis worked with forensic analysts to ensure every claim would stand trial. Advanced probabilistic genotyping strengthened the DNA result. Digital re-enhancement of the 1991 scene photos revealed matching tire tread spacing consistent with Dawson's Buick model. Even the old fingerprint lift from Valerie's car door, long considered useless, produced a partial ridge match under modern laser scanning. What once required faith now had math. The cold case unit presented its findings to the district attorney in early 2019. The DA, after reviewing a 240-page dossier, said, "This is the cleanest resurrection of a case I've seen in 30 years. Forensic progress gave Montgomery what persistence alone never could. Proof. The science didn't erase the loss, but it re-anchored the narrative. Valerie was no longer an unsolved mystery. She was a woman whose final struggle had preserved her own evidence." Detective Ellis later said in an interview, "She fought hard enough to keep his DNA under her nails. That's courage in its purest form." The arrest reignited faith in the system, at least for a while. Churches held vigils of gratitude instead of mourning. Newspapers ran headlines that finally used the word solved. And in one corner of an evidence lab, the technician who first reopened the packet wrote a note on the chain of custody form. "Returned to active status. Justice pending." When news of Reginald Dawson's arrest broke, Montgomery didn't know whether to feel relief or betrayal. For decades, Dawson had been part of the community's wallpaper, always there, always helpful, the kind of man who fixed lights in the church hall or changed a neighbor's flat tire without being asked. He wasn't an outsider. He was one of them. Reggie Dawson had been born and raised in Montgomery's West End, just like Valerie. In the early 90s, he worked as a freelance electrician, known for undercharging his neighbors and keeping to himself. People remembered his deep laugh, the way he called everyone sis or brother. He'd spent years volunteering at Greater Hope Baptist Church, wiring microphones and soundboards for choir rehearsals. He wasn't wealthy, but he was dependable, the kind of quiet man small towns learn to trust. His criminal record before 2015 was nearly blank. Only a few misdemeanors for unpaid tickets, nothing that screamed danger. But after his arrest for assault in Autauga County, old acquaintances noticed something darker behind the charm. A temper, a possessiveness when women declined his help. Detective Ellis's background checks revealed a pattern stretching back decades. Restraining orders filed by two women in the late 80s, both quietly dropped. One of them, according to Ellis's notes, bore bruises that she didn't want to talk about. The pattern matched Valerie's timeline perfectly: charm, persistence, anger, retreat. In the weeks following the arrest, reporters swarmed the West End. Residents struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the man police described. "He fixed the church lights," said one congregant. "You're telling me he killed that sweet girl?" Others remembered things differently. Sister Eunice admitted that Valerie had once asked her to walk her to her car after rehearsal because Reggie made her uneasy. But no one thought much of it at the time. He was friendly, after all. The local newspaper ran an editorial titled "The Stranger Among Us." It captured the sentiment perfectly. The horror wasn't that the killer had come from outside. It was that he'd been inside all along. When Ellis combed through the old interview transcripts, she found Dawson's original statement from February 91. He'd claimed to have been home watching television from 7 to 10 p.m. The detail that convicted him nearly 30 years later wasn't in what he said, but what he didn't say. Records showed his maroon Buick had been issued a traffic citation at 8:12 p.m. for a broken taillight, just 6 miles from the crime scene. The officer never connected it because Dawson's name wasn't yet associated with Valerie's disappearance. That citation slip, filed in a different department, survived only because of a digitization project in 2010, cross-referenced with Valerie's last known time alive. It placed him near her route home, right when the argument was heard. The coincidence became impossibility. Prosecutors later described Dawson's motive as control disguised as care. He'd fixated on Valerie after she declined his attention, interpreting her politeness as rejection. His volunteer work at the church provided proximity. His reputation provided cover. When she resisted his advances, something in him cracked. Not out of passion, but ego. Criminal psychologist Dr. Marlene Carter, who consulted on the case, explained it simply. Predators like Dawson thrive on invisibility. They build reputations that make suspicion feel rude. By the time anyone questions them, it's already too late. The discovery of Valerie's body had shaken him, but he never left Montgomery. Instead, he blended deeper into community life, attending the same church vigils, donating to the same collections, shaking the same hands as Valerie's grieving family. For decades, he lived parallel to his crime, protected by time and familiarity. When police escorted him into the courthouse for arraignment, the hallway fell silent. Alicia and Jamal sat side by side in the front row, their hands clenched together. He looked at them once, then down at the floor. No apology, no recognition. Reporters shouted questions as he was led away. "Did you know her? Did you kill Valerie McCorvey?" He said nothing. Outside, Pastor Thompson addressed the crowd. "Let this be a lesson to our city. Evil doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it wears a familiar face." Community reactions split down the middle. Some neighbors defended him, unable to reconcile memories of his kindness with the evidence. Others condemned him instantly, recalling every uneasy moment they'd brushed aside. For Detective Ellis, the case became more than an investigation. It became a mirror for all the women whose warnings went unheard. "People said she overreacted," she told an interviewer. "But she was right to be afraid." By 2019, forensic confirmation, witness re-interviews, and old paperwork painted an unshakable picture. Reggie Dawson was the last person to see Valerie McCorvey alive. His DNA was beneath her nails, his car matched the fibers on her coat, and his silence matched his guilt. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, Montgomery could finally answer the question that haunted it. Who killed Valerie McCorvey? But another question remained. Why did it take so long to see what was right in front of them? The trial would try to answer both. The morning after Reginald Dawson's arrest, Montgomery woke to flashing headlines. Cold case breakthrough. Man charged in 1991. Murder of Valerie McCorvey. For older residents, it felt like a ghost from the past had stepped back into their living rooms. For the younger generation, it was the first time they realized the story their parents whispered about was real. and it had finally found its villain. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Local channels replayed grainy photos of Dawson from church picnics, his arm draped casually over folding chairs. In every picture, he looked ordinary. Too ordinary to believe capable of such brutality. By noon, social media was awash with disbelief. "No way, not Reggie," one comment read. "He helped fix my mom's fence last year." Others were angrier. "He sat in that church knowing what he did." Greater Hope Baptist Church held an emergency prayer service that evening. The sanctuary was packed. Pastor Thompson's voice trembled as he addressed the crowd. "We pray for Valerie's family, and yes, we pray for the man accused. But we also pray for ourselves, for being blind for so long." For Alicia and Jamal, the arrest was both victory and burden. When Detective Ellis confirmed the charges, Alicia wept, whispering, "Mama, they know now." Jamal remained silent for hours. Later, he admitted, it didn't feel like closure, more like someone opened an old wound again. The DA's office invited them to view the evidence presentation. On a sterile conference table lay the photos, lab reports, and the envelope that had slept in storage for decades. When Ellis placed it in front of them, sealed and marked with their mother's name, Alicia reached out but didn't touch it. "That's her last fight," she said softly. As national outlets picked up the story, new reporters arrived daily. They wanted sound bites, tears, and redemption arcs. The McCorveys refused interviews, issuing only a short statement. "We thank law enforcement for never forgetting Valerie. Justice delayed is not justice denied." Still, the coverage reignited uncomfortable debates. How many other cold cases lay dormant because no one had fought to preserve the evidence? Why had it taken a private lab, not state resources, to solve a decades-old murder? Detective Ellis faced both praise and scrutiny. When asked why she'd chosen this case, she replied, "Because a mother shouldn't die waiting for an answer." Over the following weeks, Montgomery turned reflective. Old church bulletins reappeared, newsstands reprinted the 1991 headlines. A mural of Valerie, painted by local students, went up on a brick wall downtown. For many, the arrest brought long-delayed peace. For others, it reopened guilt. The realization that Dawson had been in their midst, undetected for so long. At the next Sunday service, Pastor Thompson ended his sermon with quiet conviction. The devil doesn't always wear horns. Sometimes he wears a deacon's smile. But truth has a way of finding its way home, even if it takes 27 years. Outside, Alicia and Jamal stood beneath the same porch light their grandmother had kept burning. For the first time, it didn't feel like a symbol of waiting. It felt like light reclaiming darkness. On May 6, 2019, the trial of State of Alabama versus Reginald Dawson began inside the Montgomery County Courthouse, the same building where Valerie's disappearance had first been logged 28 years earlier. The courtroom was standing room only. Reporters filled the back rows. The McCorvey family filled the front. Judge Eleanor Nash, a former prosecutor known for her calm precision, presided. Her first words set the tone. This court recognizes that justice delayed does not mean justice denied. We are here because the truth endured. The jury, 9 women and 3 men, was selected carefully. Many had grown up in the same neighborhoods once haunted by Valerie's murder. During voir dire, nearly all admitted they remembered the case from childhood. The defense didn't object. Dawson's attorney, a court-appointed public defender named Richard Klein, had little leverage except to challenge the science. District Attorney Harold Myers opened with quiet force. He didn't start with the crime, he started with the nail scrapings. This evidence sat in a box for 26 years, he told the jury, and yet when opened it spoke clearly. Valerie McCorvey fought for her life, and she fought hard enough to leave her killer's name written in her own blood. He gestured toward the sealed evidence envelope displayed under glass. Jurors leaned forward. One by one, the state's witnesses rebuilt the timeline. The discovery of Valerie's car, keys dangling in the ignition, the early dismissal of Dawson as a suspect due to lack of proof. The 2017 DNA hit that rewrote everything, then came the science. Forensic experts from the Virginia lab explained next-generation sequencing in plain terms. They showed slides of matching alleles, the statistical impossibility of coincidence. Even the faint blood smear on the car door matched Dawson's genetic signature. The prosecution's story was clear and chilling. Valerie resisted, clawed at her attacker, and carried his DNA with her to the grave. Klein's strategy was predictable: undermine the evidence through doubt. He questioned chain of custody integrity, citing the decades-old storage. He argued contamination could not be ruled out. "We don't convict on maybes," he repeated. But the lab countered with documentation, every transfer signed, sealed, and preserved. "If this was contaminated," the lead analyst said, "we wouldn't have a consistent profile across 4 independent samples." Klein then pivoted to sympathy. He portrayed Dawson as an aging man accused by ghosts, suggesting his memory was unreliable and his health too fragile for incarceration. The jury listened politely, but their eyes told another story. Perhaps the most powerful testimony came from those who had known both Valerie and Dawson. Gloria Parks described Valerie's discomfort at work. "She told me he kept showing up where he wasn't supposed to be." Sister Eunice's voice broke as she recalled the night Valerie asked to be walked to her car. And then came Alicia. She was poised but trembling. "For 28 years, she said, I've lived with not knowing. Every Christmas, every birthday, every graduation, there was always someone missing. I'm here because my mother can't speak for herself. But she left something stronger than words. She left proof." Her statement lasted only 3 minutes, but no one breathed during it. Even the judge wiped her eyes discreetly. When the defense called Dawson to testify, the room went silent. He shuffled to the stand, frail, thin, but still sharp-eyed. He denied everything, claimed he'd barely known Valerie, claimed contamination, claimed conspiracy. The prosecutor's cross-examination dismantled him piece by piece. Myers displayed the maroon Buick photo, the traffic citation from the night of the murder, and the choir program found in Dawson's shed. "You kept her name, didn't you?" Myers asked. Dawson hesitated. "I don't remember that." "Then why was it folded in your toolbox?" He said nothing. When shown the DNA match printout, he muttered, "Science lies." Myers replied, "Science doesn't lie, Mr. Dawson. It just waited long enough for the truth to catch up." After 6 days of testimony and 9 hours of deliberation, the jury filed back into the courtroom. The forewoman's voice was steady. "On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant, Reginald Dawson, guilty." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Alicia buried her face in Jamal's shoulder. Detective Ellis, sitting a few rows back, exhaled for the first time in hours. Dawson showed no reaction, just a blank stare ahead, as if the verdict had been written long before he entered the room. Judge Nash's sentencing followed 1 week later. Dawson received 2 consecutive life sentences without parole. She addressed him directly. "You took a life that gave to others. You silenced a mother, a daughter, a sister. You sat among her mourners pretending compassion while knowing her truth. This sentence will not restore what you destroyed, but it will ensure that silence never protects you again." The courtroom stood as Valerie's family exited, not in triumph, but in quiet relief. Outside, television lights painted the courthouse steps in harsh white. Reporters called out questions. Alicia stopped briefly and said, "Justice isn't about punishment. It's about peace. And tonight, my mother can finally rest." Behind her, Jamal added, "We're not angry anymore. Just done waiting." Detective Ellis lingered in the hallway long after the cameras left. She placed her hand on the evidence box one last time before signing the release form to archive it permanently. On its label, beneath Valerie's name, she added a note in pen. "Case closed. Truth found." The morning after the verdict, Alicia woke before sunrise. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. For nearly 3 decades, every day had begun with waiting. Waiting for news, for proof, for the call that never came. This morning felt different. For the first time, there was nothing left to wait for. She brewed coffee and stepped onto her grandmother's porch, the same one where the light had burned through 27 years of darkness. She didn't turn it off. "Let it shine a little longer," she whispered. Across town, Jamal sat in his rental car outside the courthouse, watching as janitors swept confetti-like scraps of media flyers from the steps. "That's how it goes," he told a reporter later. "The story ends, but you still have to live after the ending." For Detective Monique Ellis, closing the McCorvey case was both triumph and heartbreak. She'd spent nearly a decade with the cold case unit, but this file had defined her career. When the verdict came down, she didn't celebrate. She drove straight to the evidence lab and logged the box one final time. Before leaving, she placed her hand over the label and murmured, "You can rest now." In later interviews, she would call it the case that taught me patience. Justice isn't fast. It's not clean. But sometimes, if the evidence survives and someone cares enough to keep looking, truth wins by endurance. Ellis used her own vacation days to travel to schools and community centers, teaching students about the importance of preserving evidence. She told them about the old envelope, the fragile slides, and the woman who unknowingly fought long enough to save them. Within months of the verdict, Alicia and Jamal founded the Valerie McCorvey Foundation for Cold Case Justice, a non-profit dedicated to funding DNA testing for unsolved homicides in the South. Their first donation paid for the reopening of 2 similar cases in Alabama, both of which later yielded matches. "If Mama's story can help another family sleep at night," Alicia said, "then her life still speaks." They also started an annual scholarship for young women entering forensic science. The foundation's motto, printed on every banner and letterhead, read, "Evidence never forgets." Montgomery's West End changed too. Greater Hope Baptist renamed its fellowship hall the Valerie Room and placed her photograph at the entrance. The same space where she'd once rehearsed choir solos now hosted counseling groups for families of unsolved crimes. Every January, on the week of her death, the church lights candles, not in mourning but in gratitude. Pastor Thompson's words became a yearly refrain. She was never forgotten. She was found because faith and science walked hand in hand. Local media began covering cold cases with new respect, emphasizing victims rather than suspects. The city's police department expanded its evidence preservation budget, citing Valerie's case as the reason. Reginald Dawson spent his final years in a state penitentiary outside Birmingham. According to prison staff, he spoke little and received no visitors. He died in early 2022 of natural causes. His body was unclaimed. When reporters asked Alicia if she had any comment, she replied simply, "He's gone." That chapter's closed. We're still writing ours. By 2023, the McCorvey house had become an unofficial landmark. Passers-by still slowed their cars at night to glimpse the amber porch light glowing through the trees. Neighbors said it never once went out, even during storms. When a new family eventually bought the property, Alicia visited before the sale finalized. She asked only one favor, that the porch bulb remain lit on January 11th each year. The new owners agreed. That winter, for the first time, the family held a community vigil under that same light. Children who hadn't been born when Valerie died held candles beside elderly neighbors who still remembered the 1991 search parties. It was no longer a light of waiting. It had become a light of warning and of faith fulfilled. Across law enforcement circles, the McCorvey investigation became a teaching model for evidence integrity. The Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences added a new internal policy requiring lifetime retention for all homicide evidence. At national conferences, Detective Ellis presented the case under the title "The Nail That Solved a Murder." Journalists who had once covered the story as a mystery now wrote about it as a milestone, the first cold case in Montgomery County solved, exclusively through next-generation sequencing. Students in local schools studied it during Civics Week as an example of perseverance. Some even visited the courthouse where the verdict had been read, leaving flowers under the bronze plaque bearing Valerie's name. In her last public statement for the foundation, Alicia said, "Our mother wasn't just a victim. She was a fighter. The evidence proves it. When people ask how we kept faith for so long, I tell them, we didn't." "Faith kept us," Jamal added quietly. "People say justice came late. I say it came right on time. when we were finally ready to believe again. At sunset that evening, both siblings stood before the mural downtown. The artist had painted Valerie in her nurse's uniform, standing against a backdrop of deep blue, her hand extended as if reaching forward. Beneath it were the words, "The light never went out."